This is going to be a response to a collaboration video that Ash Howdell did with this other person who is like one of the trans guys who's been sucked into SJW ideology. His name is Nick Cameron, but we're not really going to be talking about him today. We're mostly going to be talking about Ash. And, you know, Ash, if you're watching this, if you haven't watched it already, please watch my open letter to you, because that was where I vocalized, you know, the main issues I have with you. So go watch that first if you haven't watched that already. But otherwise, like, Ash, just stop doing this, okay? It's really doing a disservice to actual trans people when you pretend to be trans, and you pretend to be dysphoric, and it just really gets under my skin. So, she's gonna explain what she thinks non-binary is, so let's get into the video.
Hey everyone, what's up? It's Nick. Welcome back to another video. Today I have a special guest, and they're gonna introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Ash. I identify as genderqueer, and my pronouns are they, them, she, her, even he, him. I'm comfy with any pronouns as long as they come from a place of respect.
Okay, why do these people always introduce themselves with their name and then their gender identity and then their pronouns? Like, are those really the most relevant, valid things about you, seriously? Like, you can't talk about something more interesting?
Okay, awesome. How did you know you were non-binary?
I figured out I was non-binary, and I know I'm non-binary because I feel a very strong connection to gender neutrality, and some days I wake up and I feel really agender.
Okay, this is the part that really irritates me, and this is the reason that I wanted to make this video. Because people always talk about, and this is the thing that always really confuses people and even makes some people genuinely against trans people. People like Ash always talk about gender as being about your feelings, and it's not about your feelings. I said this in my open letter to her. I'll say it again. Gender is not about your feelings. It is not about your identity. It's not what you feel connected to, whatever that's supposed to mean. It's about your brain. It's just about your brain, and you can't have a brain that switches from having no gender to being female. I'm sorry, Ash, you just can't. It's just not biologically possible. I'm sorry. But anyway, you say that you just wake up one day and then you just feel like something. It's so vague. Like, the terms use so vague. Oh, I just feel a connection to being agender. Like, what is that even supposed to mean? And see, this is the thing that makes people think that transgender people aren't real, because they'll hear people like this and think, oh, you know, just like that with transgender people, they just feel a certain way. They just woke up one day and they felt a certain way, when really that's not the case.
I just feel like gender isn't a concept I relate to, it's irrelevant to me, I am without gender, I'm genderless, but other days I wake up and I feel a connection to womanhood. I never feel like a super strong connection to womanhood. I never wake up and I'm like, I am woman, hear me roar, but sometimes I do have some, like, womanly pride, and I feel like a woman.
I think what Ash is describing is not feeling like a gender, but just feeling more masculine or more feminine. And I can totally relate to that. She says that some days she wakes up and she doesn't really want, like, any sort of masculinity or femininity or gender expression, and that's normal. That's normal. It's normal to feel more masculine on some days and more feminine on other days. That doesn't make you a third gender, and that doesn't mean that you have no gender. It just means, like, you don't want to dress super feminine or super masculine. Like, that's it. And again, you're like, oh, I never feel super feminine. Well, fine. Barely any woman does. Like, why does this make you special? Why does this make you a third gender? That just makes you normal to feel more masculine on some days, more feminine on other days.
Now those feelings, the feelings of being gender neutral and the feelings of having a connection to womanhood, I can alternate between them. I can wake up one day and feel one thing. I can wake up another day and feel the other way.
Stop talking about waking up and feeling different ways. This is, again, something that makes transgender people look bad, because transgender people don't wake up one day and like, oh, I feel like a man, I'm going to transition to a man. That's not how it works. It's about having the brain of the opposite sex. And you don't have the brain of the opposite sex, Ash. I'm sorry.
I'm fluid like that, but other times I can feel them at the same time. I can feel agender and womanly simultaneously.
How does that make any sense? How can you have no gender and feel male or female at the same time? Those things literally contradict each other. This is like another SJW Schrodinger's cat thing. These people don't even realize that they contradict each other.
So that's how I know I'm non-binary.
Tell people who don't understand completely, what would you say the biggest differences are between non-binary genders and binary genders?
So the biggest difference between non-binary and binary genders simply comes from their definition, comes from what they are. The binary genders are man and woman. That's it. So if you identify as a man, if you identify exclusively as a man and nothing else, then you're binary. If you identify as a woman, just a woman, and that's it, then you're binary.
This whole identifying exclusively as a certain way is really getting under my skin. This is back with the whole Riley Dennis thing. Like, oh, I'm a woman and I'm non-binary. There's no such thing as not identifying exclusively as a man or exclusively as a woman. You either are or you aren't. Like, how can you be partially a man and partially something else? That literally makes no sense. Like, how does that make any sense? Like, how do you know how much percentage male you are? Are you like, I'm 79% female and 10% whatever made up gender? Like, how does that work? How does that work?
But non-binary is either a little bit more or a little bit less than that. So for example, a little bit less, you could be agender or genderless. So you don't identify with the two binary genders. You identify without any gender. Or maybe if you feel a little bit more, you could feel like both of those things. You could be bigender. You could feel like a man and a woman.
First of all, this whole I feel like a man and a woman thing doesn't make any sense to me. How can you be a man and a woman at the same time? They're literally opposites. Like, if you have a male brain, you want a male body. If you have a female brain, you want a female body. How can you want both of those things at the same time? But again, she's not talking about brains, I understand. She's talking about identities, which is why is she addressing them as actual genders then, if they're just random arbitrary identities and not actually what people's brains are.
You could flip-flop between them or feel them both at the same time. Or you could feel like something totally different. You could feel Nutois, or Maverick, or all these other, or gender fluid.
First of all, stop with the ear rape. What is with the whole coughing in front of the camera? Just edit that stuff out, please, because it is violation of everybody who's watching that's ears. Second of all, what is neutral or Maverick? Like, what is that even supposed to mean? These are just made-up terms. They're just literally made-up terms. And you're claiming that there's some kind of third gender. Like, what would that third gender be, though? Like, what would it be exactly? It's not like there's some sort of third sex, or you can make your own kind of third gametes and interact with each other in a different fertilized way. Like, no. And if there's no third sex, how can there be a third gender? What would that third gender even be? What would that brain even look like?
Binary is basically man or woman, and non-binary is anything that's not that, and that would be the biggest difference. Another difference between these identities is kind of a cultural one. Right now, binary trans identities are arguably more accepted than non-binary trans identities.
First of all, stop calling non-binary trans. It's not the same thing. You cannot transition to being non-binary. You can't. So stop calling it trans. Second of all, the reason why being trans is seen as more valid as being non-binary is because there's actual evidence for being trans, and there's no evidence for being non-binary. So, haven't you considered that?
There's a huge debate currently about whether or not non-binary identities are valid, whether or not these genders are made up, are created just for the people identifying that way to get attention, and etc. So that's a huge difference. I would say that trans binary identities are generally more accepted than trans non-binary identities.
Again, Ash, why do you think that is? Why don't you look into why that is? And though I'm not saying that everybody who identifies as non-binary is trying to get attention, those terms literally are made up. They have no validity in science. They have no validity in anything other than things that people have made up. I do think there are a lot of people who are not trying to get attention, who are just being misled into thinking because they don't fit gender roles, there's some kind of third gender. I know people who think like that, but that still doesn't make it valid. Just because they're not trying to get attention doesn't mean that they're not being misled into something. It doesn't mean that they actually have that gender in their brain.
Awesome. What is some advice you would give someone who is trying to figure out their gender?
As far as advice goes for someone trying to figure out their gender, my biggest suggestion for them would be to be patient. Gender is a very complex and confusing thing, and a thing that can change over time. So if you don't have it all figured out, that's okay. Don't stress about it. That's normal. Other people feel that way too. You aren't falling short at all by not totally understanding every part of your gender.
It's funny how these people always advise to take it slow when trying to figure out your gender, but then they immediately jump to all of these insane labels. Like, hypocrisy much? And then also, Ash, again, you're claiming that gender is fluid and that it's just this very complex thing. I think what you're confusing it with is gender expression. Yes, gender expression is complex. Yes, gender expression is fluid, but not the sex of your brain. That's actually pretty simple, and that's not fluid. There's no evidence for that.
Also, the way you express yourself. And what you call yourself, and the words you use to describe your gender, and how you know yourself to be, and what you feel inside, that can all change over time.
Again, you're reiterating that gender is some special, complex, kind of fluid thing, and you're talking about it in terms of feelings. Again, gender is not about your feelings. It is about your brain. Why do you not understand this?
So don't let that freak you out either. Be patient, because you're going to find a place that you're comfy, that feels good to you. And maybe after you find that place, you'll change a little bit, and you'll find a new place where you feel comfy, and that's okay too. But just, if you're confused right now, if you're feeling a little confused or a little lost, it will all be well. You'll figure it out. Be patient.
What are some myths you would like to debunk about non-binary people?
My least favorite myth when it comes to non-binary identities is that those people, non-binary people, are only identifying that way in order to get attention, in order to feel special. That is so not true.
Then explain, Ash, why you have about 10 different labels that you like to use, and how they just happen to be oh so rare, and oh so unique. Why do you just happen? Look, it doesn't really statistically make sense. They just happen to be all of these crazy identities. I don't think so. And even if you weren't trying to get attention, Ash, there's still plenty of people who are. And again, I'm not saying that everybody's trying to get attention. There are plenty of young people who are misled into genuinely thinking that because they don't conform to gender roles, that they're a third gender. But there are plenty of people who are just trying to get attention. Like, what is the chance that you just happen to fit all of these special labels, Ash? Come on, what are the chances? Really, what are the chances?
I can't stress how not accurate that is. Non-binary identities are currently so up for debate, and it's so scary to have such a personal thing, your gender, your identity, just be like picked apart by millions of people in the media and on YouTube.
You're saying gender is so personal. It's really not. It's not, okay? And again, you're conflating your random, arbitrary identities with actual gender. The sex of your brain is not personal, okay? Everybody knows what that is. Same thing with the sex of your body. Like, why should that be something so personal? Again, you're conflating the way you arbitrarily identify with your actual gender, and this is a problem I have with you. The random labels you want to slap on are not the same as the sex of your brain. They're not.
Telling you that who you are and, like, one of the deepest parts of you is invalid or not real or superficial. Oh.
Again, you're putting so much emphasis onto the random gender identity, saying like, oh, they're part of who I am. They're so personal and deep to me. Really? The random labels that you got from Tumblr or whatever, they're personal to you, they're deep to you, just because they describe how you fit into gender roles? Honestly, like, how does how you fit into gender roles have anything to do with anything? Like, honestly. And again, it really seems like you're trying to seem special because you're saying, oh, it's so personal to me. Like, how is that not attention-seeking? How's that not attention-seeking, Ash?
It doesn't feel good. It's not something anybody would elect into.
You guys always say, oh, I'm not identifying as non-binary to get attention because there are a lot of bad aspects to identifying as non-binary. And the problem is, the way that you guys try to get attention is not through the identity itself, but through the victimhood that it creates. And so, you guys always show this when you complain, oh my god, I'm such a victim, why would I ever choose this? Well, the reason why you chose this was that so you could be a victim. It ties into the whole Oppression Olympics thing.
To be the subject of that debate. It's kind of like years ago when the greater population was arguing about whether or not being gay was a choice. And then people would come back and say, well, if being gay was a choice, why would anyone choose it? You get so much adversity flung at you. That's kind of the same with non-binary identities.
No, don't compare being non-binary to being gay. Again, you're saying that non-binary is just an identity, right? So is being gay just an identity? Are people who are gay not really attracted to the same sex and they just identify that way? Think about that, Ash. Think about that. Identifying as non-binary is not the same thing as being gay. Being gay is something that's actually validated in science, that it's something that can actually happen. And we've seen, actually, not just in humans, but in other animals as well. Meanwhile, there's no evidence for non-binary genders anywhere. So, you're making a false equivalence.
If we're just doing it to get attention, then it must be a choice. But who would choose to have their identity ripped apart and called invalid, and who would choose to face that adversity? Who would want that?
Again, you're painting yourself to be a victim, and that's the part that you've chose. The victimhood. And then also, you keep calling non-binary identities, which they are. Again, that's your gender identity, not your actual gender. So, you're saying by identity, but doesn't the word identity imply that you chose it, and then you're saying that it's not a choice to identify a certain way? What?
It's not fun. The special attention those people think we get, it's not good attention, it's not fun attention, and it's not worth all the hate that comes with it. So no one would elect into that kind of attention.
It's still attention, though, good or bad, and that's what you want. You just want attention. I mean, you're so transparent, Ash. You're so transparent. And again, this is really harming actual trans people. Stop trying to compare your struggles to those of gay people or those of actual trans people, because they're not. Those things are actually validated in science. Your random gender labels are not validated in science, and in fact, many of them are just not scientifically possible.
If they didn't really feel non-binary. For a long time, actually, I stayed closeted. I'd kind of figured out that I wasn't cis, but I was like, I'm not going to say anything about it because I don't want extra attention. That can stay a secret because I don't want all the scrutiny that comes with being non-binary. But then eventually I was just like, I don't care what other people think anymore, and I decided to just do me, and that felt good.
Thanks for explaining that to people. That's awesome. A common misconception about gender is some people are confused with the term tomboy, gender expression, and just gender. Could you explain a little bit more the differences between all of those?
This will be interesting to see what Ash thinks about all those, because these are the things that she keeps conflating.
So the difference between gender expression, gender identity, and just being a tomboy is a complicated one. So gender expression is anything that a person uses to communicate their gender to others. It could be clothes, it could be smell, it could be speech, it could be their mannerisms, it could be their pronouns, it could be how they decorate their room, it could be their gaming avatar that they choose when they're playing on their computer. Anything that cues others into the gender they'd like to be perceived as is gender expression. Gender expression is almost exclusively outward. It's tangible, it's touchable, it's oftentimes visible or audible. That's gender expression.
Right off the bat, wrong. That's so wrong. I can't even express how wrong that is. Okay, yes, in most cases, people's gender expression does match with their gender. It is kind of how they communicate their gender or whatever. But there are still feminine men and masculine women. Like, Ash, you dress very masculine, but you're still a woman. Wouldn't you be communicating to other people that you're a man or something? Again, you're getting it confused. Gender expression is just what clothes you want to wear and stuff that's normally associated with gender roles or with one gender or the other. It usually has something to do with your actual gender, yes, but not always. Like, are you honestly saying that a feminine man is communicating to others that he's a woman because he wears feminine clothes and has feminine mannerisms? Are you honestly implying that? And then also, how they decorate their room and what their gaming avatar is? What does that have to do with anything? How is that gender expression? And their pronouns? No, pronouns are not a form of gender expression, as is commonly a misconception. It just refers to whether you're male or female. That's literally it. It's not a form of gender expression. It doesn't refer to whether you're masculine or feminine. You don't see feminine men using she pronouns or masculine women using he pronouns. It just refers to what your actual gender is.
Gender identity is who we know ourselves to be.
This is such a vague term. Oh, just how I know I am. I just know. I'm not gonna give any specific details. I just know. Like, this is the thing that really irritates me. Stop being so vague. When you make things so vague, you make things so confusing to other people. No, gender is the sex of your brain. That is a concrete, objective thing that we can measure. Not, oh, I just feel a certain way. That's how I feel. Like, what is that even supposed to mean? What is it even supposed to mean to feel a certain gender? That doesn't make any sense.
How we feel and how we understand ourselves inside and what we think our gender is. Sometimes it comes really natural and instinctual. A person just knows their gender and it's as simple as that. Other times it's more complicated. It takes some self-reflection, some formulation of self-concept. So your gender identity is who you are, and your gender expression is how you communicate that. Then there are words like tomboy that sometimes get thrown around at the non-binary community in a way that kind of diminishes or marginalizes or trivializes our genders. Because people don't believe in non-binary identities, so they want to make sense of us, so they call us words that they understand, like tomboy. And this is because a lot of the non-binary representation, a lot of the non-binary people that we see in media, especially on YouTube, are AFAB, or assigned female at birth. People who don't believe in non-binary identities see AFAB people dressing androgynously. They want to make sense of it. They don't believe in non-binary identities, so they call us tomboys.
The reason why people call quote-unquote non-binary people tomboys is because the reason that those people say they are non-binary is because they're masculine women. That's it. And then the other thing is that the whole assigned female at birth, again, really gets under my skin. I actually heard from somebody on my comments that those terms were actually originally used to describe intersex people who had genitals that didn't match their actual sex, who had things like complete AIS or something, where they were assigned female at birth, like people thought that their sex was female, but it actually turned out their sex was male, so there actually was a mismatch between their genitals and their sex. And that actually makes sense, because what the doctor mistakenly thought their sex was isn't what their sex actually was. So that actually makes sense, but then people are misusing this term to just describe people whose sex actually is female, or people whose sex actually is male. You're like trying to imply that your sex is not female. People always say that doctors assign genders. They don't. They just observe your sex. That's literally it.
And a lot of times they think that we feel we have to have a special gender in order just to match our gender expression.
No, again, it's because those people say, oh, I'm non-binary because I feel kind of masculine sometimes. And people go, oh, that's just being a tomboy, because that's what that is. And also you're saying, oh, we see in the media all the people who identify as non-binary were born female. Well, it's not just the media. That's like 90% of people who identify as non-binary now, because it's like a trend among girls. It's like a girl thing now. It's not very common among boys, and I don't know why. I think it's maybe because, the whole modern feminism thing is something that's mostly adopted by women, because it's very sexist against men. So I don't know, but for some reason, it's a trend among women.
They think that because we dress in a gender non-conforming way, we feel that we also need a gender non-conforming gender.
And that's true. That's literally just the justification that quote-unquote non-binary people give. They're like, oh, I didn't really conform to gender rules, so I must be a third gender, and I must be my own special gender. That's not coming out of thin air. That's coming out of what people actually see.
But that's not the case. I dress like this because I like to dress like this. But my gender isn't non-binary because I like to dress like this. My gender is non-binary because my gender is non-binary.
Conflating gender and gender identity, using them interchangeably. Once again, they are not the same thing. You're just saying, oh, my gender just is non-binary. That's just the sex of my brain. Okay, prove it. Prove it. Prove that. Are you transitioning it to anything? I didn't think so.
So it all gets very complicated and confusing, but basically gender expression is an outward thing. It's how a person communicates their gender to others. Gender identity is who a person knows themselves to be and what their gender is. And a tomboy is somebody who identifies as a girl but dresses in kind of a boyish manner. That's the traditional definition of tomboy. Some people define it in another way, and that's totally okay.
Why would people define it another way? That doesn't make any sense. So they want to make tomboy be its own special gender now? Just kill me. And why can't you just be a tomboy, Ash? That's the thing. Wouldn't it be so much easier if you were just a tomboy, not some made-up gender? Like, why do you have to identify as something random? That's the thing. You claim, oh, I'm not trying to get attention, but it seems like you want to be quote-unquote genderqueer or non-binary or whatever. Why do you want to be something like that so badly? Why do you claim to be trans and you want to be trans? Like, why would you want to be trans? It's just something that really gets under my skin. And so she just goes, just saying, oh, my channel's linked here. It's just like the last 6 seconds of the video. Ash, stop doing this. Stop doing this. You're confusing people. You're conflating things. Once again, if you haven't seen my video where I did the open letter to you, please watch that. I think that's a very concise and accurate description of the issues that I have with you. You're really hurting trans people by doing this. So, as always, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.
Feel the funk blast!